All right, so we had another week and similar stories to what has been happening recently in that we basically had a flat week. The S&P was almost exactly flat. It was up ever so slightly, and it actually did hit a new all-time high on, looks like early on Friday. It was well over 5,500 on the S&P, and then it closed the day actually down quite significantly from that high, over 1% from that high. So Friday it started out very positively, but actually ended up quite bearish. And I don't think there was a major catalyst from that, from what I could see. But I think that it's more or less a sign of things to come, in that I think we're going to need some sort of a catalyst to propel the markets clearly higher and some sort of a catalyst to propel the markets clearly lower. Again, just my opinion, but I think that's quite obvious, to be honest. And I mean, if you look at rates, they're kind of range bound. They were actually up slightly recently, so that's interesting. But when it comes to rates, I think that if anything, it's looking like we're going to get a cut earlier than expected, not later. I think that September meeting, we could very well get a cut. If not, I'd say probably later in the year, maybe even the last one in December, I believe it is. So that is kind of what's going to happen there. As far as the summer goes, I don't see us going too much higher, like I said, without a major catalyst. Now, could that mean a cut? Who knows? Obviously, there's a lot of things that could happen, but there's a lot of things that could happen that could force the markets lower as well. So again, there's a lot of things to keep an eye on, but my position is still probably a cut later in the year, maybe two. That's possible, but I would say more than likely one later in the year. See how it goes, kind of thing. But if you look at other places, like if you look at Canada, for example, again, our latest inflation print came out a little bit hotter than expected, and that is causing Bank of Canada to be like, yeah, we're not cutting again until at least September. I don't know if that happens. Again, Canada and the U.S., there's quite a bit of difference, at least from what I can tell. The U.S. economy is definitely better, but I honestly, I think inflation may even be worse in Canada. But again, I would have to dig into that a little bit deeper. But that's kind of that, in that it seems like kind of the opposite trend here, in that places are definitely, or not places, but the Fed and the Bank of Canada, et cetera, I think that they're all kind of desperate to cut, but they can't be cutting when inflation is still high. So that's kind of puts them between a rock and a hard place. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. The reason that I think that there's still going to be cuts is I don't think the economy is as good as they say. But again, the question there is, who is they? I don't think the economy is that good, and I think that's going to be hard to get Now again, we could see a little bit of an inflation spike. That definitely is possible. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me. But going back up to 9%, 8%, that's unlikely, because I don't think the economy is good enough. And to be quite frank, the only way that's going to happen probably is if we get a massive stimulus from the government, which again, that is possible. That wouldn't be surprising. So keep an eye for all of that. If we look at some individual stocks here, NVIDIA was kind of the big one of past week here. Or actually past couple weeks. So NVIDIA had a very big downturn, for lack of a better way of putting it. So again, this is not factoring in the stock split here, so that's kind of annoying. But 2 weeks ago, it came it came down from 135 all the way down to about 108, which is quite a bit. That's probably 20% drop almost. Actually, that is more than a 20% drop. So. And then it came back up to about I think into the mid 120s, and then this past week back down to 117, and then we went back up to about 127. Even on Friday, it only went up to about 127 again. So it's looking, and this is one of the main reasons why I think we've probably reached a peak in the markets, at least in the near term. And the reason for this is the markets were led higher mainly by the big tech companies, namely NVIDIA. And Nvidia, it's looking like it's hit its at least near-term peak. I mean, it already peaked as one of the largest companies in the world. It was the largest company in the world briefly. I think Microsoft is a little bit higher again now. But when you look at Nvidia, I wouldn't touch it. Even if it came down 20, 30%, I still wouldn't touch it. For me, it'd have to be probably 50% down for me to want to touch it, because there is so much growth already priced into this company. It's not even funny. I mean, if you want to look at an example here, let's just look at their revenue, just as an example. If we look at their revenue, let's just look at the last quarter, just because it's probably the closest number. So this is going to be first quarter of 2024. Again, you have, what is that, $26 billion. And if we compare it to Apple, which again, they are larger than, right? So if we go into Apple's revenue was 90 billion, almost 91. So that's almost 3.5 times the revenue, right? So they are how much bigger than Apple? They're actually almost the same as Apple. So roughly the same market cap as Apple, but they have 3.5 times less revenue. So again, you got to keep in mind that, again, Nvidia is trading at an extreme premium. Even if you want to argue that they're going to grow double as fast as Apple in the next decade, which is possible, but I still think it's probably unlikely, that means that, again, they're roughly, 40-50% overvalued. So I mean, if we look at Apple's, they're trading for a 31 price to free cash flow, a 32 PE. Like, that's not cheap. Like, that's already pricing in a lot of growth into Apple. So Apple's probably 10-20% overvalued where it's at right now. So again, you got to keep in mind too that, again, when it comes to these big tech companies, I think they're all overvalued. Maybe Google, I'd have to dig in a little bit deeper. Let's see where they're trading here. Microsoft's definitely expensive. Tesla's definitely expensive. If you look at Amazon, they're a little expensive. Yeah, I mean, Google's trading a little bit above its PE, 19% above its historical price to free cash flow. So again, the market, I think, clearly is the big tech companies are clearly a little bit overvalued, but there still are some companies out there, like a lot of these industrial names, there's some energy names. There's some financials names that are decently priced, but the odd materials one as well. Those more the more bread and butter companies, those are the ones that I would be looking out for right now if you're going to be buying individual stocks, because the big tech companies are overvalued. And that's why I would be a little bit skeptical about buying market cap weighted ETFs right now, because they're going to be disproportionately in these companies. But again, if your goal is to buy and hold for 10, 20 years, probably not a big deal, at least in my opinion. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up here, again, Bitcoin just continues to go nowhere. In fact, it's down a little bit more, I even think. But again, if you look at this, Bitcoin ETFs saw 73 million in inflows, the fourth straight day of inflows, even though the price has not gone anywhere. And I think, from what I can tell, the reason for this recent downturn in Bitcoin is there's rumors of the Mt. Gox coins being dumped onto the market. And that definitely is a real concern. But the other thing you have to keep in mind there is those rumors have been around for, honestly, years, maybe even... I remember like 2021, people talking about that, 2022. So is it going to happen? It very well could happen. I have no idea. Honestly, I haven't dug super deep into it. But stuff like that has happened all the time. I mean, it's like China banning Bitcoin. They do it every second year. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. Like, I really wouldn't. And the reason for that is when it comes to Bitcoin, when you look at the whales are always buying. Like, when you look at, let's say, addresses with more than 10 Bitcoins or even 100 Bitcoin, whatever number you want to use, those addresses always are disproportionately buying. And when you figure out that data, when you recognize that data, it makes no sense to not still be long-term bullish. Now, again, near term, yeah, we could go down more. That certainly could happen. Nobody knows. But long term, math is math, and I mean economics are economics. And again, I think that getting back to like 20, not that 2010s era inflation was good necessarily, but getting back to that level where people certainly were getting, the average person was getting better off over the long run. I think that, again, inflation is going to be higher than we want. And again, people are going to have to hide out somewhere. And it's not going to be bonds, right? When inflation's 3-4% or 5% and you're getting 4 or 5% of your bonds, you're actually not getting anywhere. So the options are going to be stocks, which have their own problems, or you have Bitcoin, obviously you have gold and stuff like that. But again, over time, I still think that a disproportionate amount of people are going to be like, hey, Bitcoin's the way to go. Now, again, I'm not necessarily, oh yeah, it's going to be the next world reserve currency or anything like that, but I think it's going to be one of those slowly but surely things. And again, the main thing for that is, again, over time you have the halvings and you have the limited amount of coins. I mean, within the next generation or so, maybe it'll take a little bit longer, but eventually there's going to be a point to where the amount of new Bitcoin coming online is actually going to be going down. Like eventually, because people are going to be losing them, so on and so forth. And again, a lot of people talk about that like, oh, don't, that's a bad thing. And it's like, not necessarily. People, and this is the big problem too with that, is that people are so brainwashed into the existing way of doing things that they just, their minds can't comprehend doing something any differently. And this is why I've always said that I don't think the majority of people ever will adopt Bitcoin, because there's so many ignorant people out there, for lack of a better way of putting it. So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up today. If you liked the video, please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and stay tuned for more.